argument today?
No, Madam Secretary.
Well,
I'm arguing that it doesn't ever materially impact an election, and yet you like to, with your snarky attitude, throw back that we want undocumented immigrants to vote, which is absolute bogus. In reality, you want to create an excuse to terrorize.
ICE is obstructing state and local criminal prosecutions. A May 8th, 2025 article entitled, "He Faced a Possible Prison Term for Assault. Instead, He Was Deported." A December 26th article entitled, "As ICE Ramps Up Deportations, Texas Prosecutors Say They're Losing Key Witnesses in Criminal Cases."
Objection.
A July 12th article entitled, "ICE Deportations Are Derailing Colorado Criminal Prosecutions."
Objection.
A January 26th article entitled, "Prosecutors Stunned as ICE Let Suspect in $100 million Jewelry Heist Leave U.S."
Objection.
And a February 13th article entitled, "Father Who Found His 11-Year-Old Murdered in Texas Nearly Deported by ICE Before He Could Testify."
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Noem, about 3 weeks ago, you stood at a press conference and said, and I quote here, "When it gets to Election Day, we've been proactive to make sure we have the right people voting, electing the right leaders to lead this country." We all know what you mean and meant by the right people voting to elect the right leaders, but I want to narrow in on a different part of it. What proactive measures have you taken to make sure that the right people vote for the right leaders?
The job of the Department of Homeland Security is to secure our critical infrastructure, and elections are deemed by statute in law
I understand
as
that.
critical
That's
infrastructure.
long before. What proactive measures
So what
have
that
you
means is
taken?
that we go forward and identify vulnerabilities that may exist in that system, and then how that applies to elections is talking with states who run elections, identify and help them see how they can possibly be
I understand,
compromised,
yes, CISA
and then
is
we
supposed
offer,
to do that, but let's
mitigation.
discuss, if we don't mind, just to reclaim my time because I want to move forward, some of the other possibilities that have been floated for how you will take or might take proactive measures to, quote unquote, make sure that the right people vote and elect the right leaders. Yesterday in the Senate hearing, you were asked a couple times about whether you would or would not station immigration agents at polling sites. A couple of times, you said you had no plans to do so. Is that still your testimony?
That is, I have no plans.
Okay,
no
so we all
reason.
know that no plans today can turn into full plans tomorrow, so it doesn't answer the question. And you're still, am I right, unwilling to say that you will not send DHS agents to polling places. Is that correct?
I'm not certain why you and the Democrat Party are so concerned that that would actually happen. That must mean that you're indicating people would be showing up at the polls to vote illegally, or that you would want illegal aliens to show
Okay,
up
so
and
let's
vote.
talk about that, because this is the
what you
big
think will
voter
happen?
fraud theory, right?
No, it's.
You're aware of the Heritage Foundation,
about.
right?
Because I have not
Are
recommended.
you aware of the Heritage Foundation?
Yes, I am, but I have not
Okay, so
recommended.
the Heritage Foundation, correct me if I'm wrong, is a right-wing think tank, created, drafted Project 2025, and it's been on a crusade to convince the American people that voter fraud by undocumented immigrants is a big deal. You know what the problem is? Is that you never talk about any actual evidence. And in fact, the Heritage Foundation's own information, its own data, says that in the 32 years from 1992 to 2024, out of 2 billion votes cast, 10 undocumented immigrants were found to have committed voter fraud. 10 out of 2 billion. Does that sound like a significant problem to you, that your answer about why you might put immigration agents is because there's voter fraud?
Individuals there, and I would think that if you have one
So you don't
person
think that
voting
voter fraud is a
improperly
problem?
in election.
So is it your testimony you don't think that voter fraud is a problem now?
I didn't say that. I said I have.
Do
no
you have
plans.
any evidence ever, any data,
There are
anything?
illegal immigrants that have voted in elections.
Yeah, they're
before
10.
That has happened.
They're 10.
And you
Do
think
you
we
have
should-
evidence more of that in
So
the last 30
are you
years?
arguing that they should be able to vote? Is that your argument today?
No, Madam Secretary.
Well, wouldn't you
I'm
want to
arguing
fix
that
any
it doesn't
fraud
ever materially impact an election, and yet
We've had
you
elections
like to,
in
with
this
your
country.
snarky attitude, throw back that we want undocumented immigrants to vote, which is absolute bogus. In reality, you want to create an excuse to terrorize our polling places. Not only that, are you familiar with this proposed executive order, 17 pages, that's been circulating?
I am not. What is it on?
It is a proposed executive order on establishing the security, integrity, and transparency of elections. And in it, it would propose that the president declare a national emergency, use executive authority to seize voting machines, and ban mail-in ballots. You've not seen this at all?
I have not read that, and I have not had those conversations with anyone at the White House.
You've not had any conversations with anyone at the White House. That's good to know. If you were asked to do any of those things, do you believe you have the constitutional authority to do that?
We are looking at the vulnerabilities to elections,
That's not my
making
question.
recommendations to states.
Do you
on what they
think
can
you have
do
the
to make sure they have
constitutional
secure
authority
elections.
to seize voting machines, to seize voter rolls, to prohibit mail-in ballots? Do you believe you have that
I've
constitutional
not
authority?
done an analysis on that, so I would not be able to speak as an
You're the
expert.
secretary of the department that is in charge of maintaining election security. You don't know what your authority is or is not?
My authority is to identify vulnerabilities and to recommend
Well, it would be
mitigation
helpful in
measures.
executing that authority if you knew what your authority was.
Time of the
I do
gentleman.
know
I yield
what
back.
my authority is.
I do think the secretary knows the right people voting are citizens, something that we passed a bill to make sure that happens. And I assume that's what she was referencing when she made that statement.
You should look at the Heritage
I now
Foundation study too, Mr. Chairman.
No, I'll be happy to look at it. I just think citizens should vote. You guys think that that shouldn't be a requirement.
So do we.
I now
So
want
do
to
we.
recognize
It's just
the
not an issue. It's not a
former
problem, and
Attorney
yet you keep
General.
talking about it.
Gentleman's time has expired. I now want to recognize the former Attorney General.
The tension in the hearing room rose the moment Representative Dan Goldman began pressing for a clear answer. What began as a routine oversight exchange quickly turned into something far more revealing. Goldman quoted a statement made weeks earlier at a press conference, a remark suggesting that officials were working to ensure that the right people were voting and choosing the right leaders. Those words may have sounded simple at first glance, but in the context of American elections, phrases like that carry enormous weight. Because in the United States, the legitimacy of government rests on a foundational promise that citizens choose their leaders freely, without interference, without intimidation, and without manipulation from those in power. Across the witness table sat Kristi Noem, the official responsible for overseeing the nation's critical infrastructure protections, including support for election security. Goldman's questioning cut straight to the heart of that responsibility. What exactly did proactive measures mean when applied to elections? And how far could federal authority extend in monitoring or influencing the voting process? Secretary Noem responded by outlining the formal role of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. The department, she explained, works with states to identify vulnerabilities in critical systems. Elections by statute are classified as critical infrastructure, systems whose security is vital to the functioning of the country. In principle, that mission is straightforward. Identify risks, assist state officials, and ensure that the technical systems behind voting remain secure from interference. But Goldman was not asking about routine cybersecurity guidance or technical assistance. He was probing something far more controversial: the possibility that federal agents might be stationed at polling locations. When asked directly whether immigration enforcement agents could appear at voting sites, Noem said she had no plans to do so. Yet Goldman pressed further, noting that in Washington, no plans today can turn into full plans tomorrow. The exchange revealed a deeper tension that has increasingly shaped American political discourse in recent years: the balance between election security and voter confidence. For decades, elections in the United States have been administered primarily by states and local jurisdictions. This decentralized structure was designed deliberately by the framers of the Constitution, creating multiple layers of oversight and preventing the concentration of election authority in a single national office. Goldman then turned to one of the most debated claims in modern politics: allegations of widespread voter fraud. He cited research compiled by the Heritage Foundation, a conservative policy institute that has spent years cataloging instances of election irregularities. According to the data Goldman referenced, over more than 3 decades and roughly 2 billion ballots cast nationwide, only a handful of cases involved non-citizens casting votes. His point was simple but politically explosive. If such incidents are extremely rare, he argued, why would federal enforcement agents ever be necessary at polling locations? Why introduce the possibility of intimidation or confusion at the very place where citizens exercise their most fundamental civic right? The conversation then took an even more dramatic turn. Goldman produced a document, a 17-page proposed executive order that had reportedly circulated among political circles. According to the description provided during the hearing, the document outlined sweeping measures related to election administration. Among its most controversial provisions was the possibility that a president could declare a national emergency and direct federal authorities to seize voting machines and restrict certain forms of voting. The room grew noticeably quieter as Goldman asked the central question, had Secretary Noem seen the proposal? Her response was direct. She said she had not read the document and had not discussed it with anyone at the White House, but Goldman pushed further. If such actions were ever requested, he asked, would the Department of Homeland Security even possess the constitutional authority to carry them out? The question hung in the air because it touched on one of the most sensitive boundaries in American governance, the line between executive power and the administration of elections. The Constitution assigns primary responsibility for election procedures to the states, while Congress retains authority to regulate federal elections through legislation. The executive branch, meanwhile, is tasked with enforcing the law, not redesigning the electoral process. Secretary Noem replied cautiously. She explained that the department's mission was to identify vulnerabilities and offer recommendations, not to administer elections directly. But when asked whether the department had the authority to seize voting machines or alter voting procedures, she acknowledged that she had not conducted a constitutional analysis of that specific scenario. For Goldman, that response illustrated a troubling uncertainty. If federal officials responsible for election security are unclear about the limits of their authority, what happens during a moment of national tension or political crisis? Moments like this reveal something deeper about American democracy. The strength of a republic does not depend solely on written laws or constitutional clauses. It depends on norms, unwritten agreements about restraint, accountability, and respect for institutional boundaries. Throughout American history, those norms have acted as guardrails for power. Presidents have wielded immense authority during wars, economic emergencies, and national disasters. Yet the system has endured because leaders, regardless of party, have generally recognized limits they should not cross. That is why hearings like this matter. Congressional oversight is not simply theater. It is one of the most important mechanisms the Constitution provides to keep the balance of power intact. Legislators question officials not only to clarify policy, but to ensure that the machinery of government remains aligned with democratic principles. In the exchange between Goldman and Noem, viewers witnessed more than a policy disagreement. They saw a fundamental debate about the boundaries of authority, the security of elections, and the responsibility of those entrusted with protecting the democratic process. And ultimately, that debate belongs to the American people. Because democracy is not preserved automatically. It is sustained through vigilance, through questions asked in public hearings, through transparency in government, and through citizens who remain engaged in the institutions that represent them. In the end, the hearing reminded us of a simple truth: power must always be examined, especially when it touches the mechanisms of democracy itself. And as the cameras fade and the chamber falls quiet, one question remains for every viewer watching this moment unfold. Who protects the integrity of the system when the system itself is under debate? Stay informed. Stay engaged. And if you believe accountability still matters in American government, subscribe to Liberty Report USA and support our work to expose the truth.